Welcome back to Leaders Call. This week, we're talking with Kelly Hatzenbuehler. She's a retired first sergeant. She was in charge of the Nebraska's resiliency program. And this week, we're going to talk about resiliency, talking about the different components of resiliency, how it fits into building leaders, and then touching on suicide prevention. Hey, Kelly, it was great seeing you again. Everybody, this is Kelly Hatzenbuehler, good friend of mine. We deployed together back in 2010. Currently, she's the victim advocate specialist with the Department of Homeland Security. And which I found out today, she works with another friend of ours, Bob Hutt. So hopefully he'll be checking this out. Um, she was in the North Dakota Army National Guard, where she originally enlisted and where she's from. She moved to Nebraska, where she transferred down here. Her first MOS was communications, and she went into engineering. She was an administrative NCO, recruiting retention, and then she transferred to be a military intelligence analyst where we met. The reason I invited her on was this week I wanted to talk about resiliency. And she was a previous R3SP coordinator for the state, which is resiliency and risk reduction and suicide prevention coordinator. So welcome, Kelly. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So what motivated you to join the military?
College money. I didn't have any money for college, and I didn't really have a plan, a focus. I had a great time in high school, and it was coming to an end, and it was coming fast, and I needed, all my friends had plans, and I didn't. So the choice to join was actually a quick one. I went and talked to a recruiter on April 1st, on April Fool's Day. And on May 1st, I went to MEPS and signed the paperwork, and then shipped out for basic on June 3rd. So there was not a lot of time to second guess any choices. It was just, I needed a plan and I needed college money. And this was pre 9/11 time. So it was weekend warrior, and I heard it was fun. Our neighbor did it, but I don't come from a military family, so I didn't have any guidance. Just kind of on a whim.
I remember my recruiter telling my mom, "Oh, we haven't deployed since, you know, 10 years or whatnot. That's not going to happen." And then the world drastically changed.
I
So,
kind of joke about I was in two different armies. I was pre 9/11 army and then post 9/11 army, and completely different for obvious reasons. But yeah, this was back in good old 1997, many years ago.
yeah, it was the same year I enlisted. Seems like forever ago. So how'd you choose your MOSs? Because you said Kamo was the first one. How'd you come across that?
So it wasn't I guess not my choice. This was the option I had. And ongoing joke, my recruiter lied to me. My recruiter's name was Steve, and he said that this MOS was great MOS because it was computers, and you were going to learn a lot about computers. Now, think back 1997, there was, not everybody had a computer in their home, let alone one in their pocket. And so upcoming understanding this computers, I was like, well, this could turn into a career. I could use this to catalyst like what I do for a living. And so the MOS was a really long AIT. It was about 19 and a half weeks, way longer than others. And so I was like, well, that's kind of good. I don't have another plan, so let's do it. And it turns out to not be the MOS at all. It was a 35 uniform or 31 uniform, I think, at the time. And I learned how to bury wire. I learned how to work on SINGAR's radios. It wasn't computers at all. So it was a quick choice to switch MOSs after I got back to my duty station. And the unit I was in was an engineering unit. It was a bridge building unit, one of the only or the only bridge building unit in the state. And I got to sit and watch them do this fun, bridge building on the float bridge on the river. And I was like, I want to do that. That looks way more fun. So after about a year, I switched MOSs and never looked back.
Awesome. So how did you end up moving to Nebraska?
So there was a deployment in 2003 to 2004. My husband and I were both in the same unit. And after he got back, he went to power plant school. There's a small trade school in Bismarck where we were living, and went through the program and got hired on by OPPD, Omaha Public Power Department. And we moved to Nebraska. So I was AGR at the time and had to leave my AGR job to move to Nebraska, but it was a really like good transitional time for me. My oldest two were 2 and 3 at the time, and I decided to try my hand at being a stay-at-home mom, raising kids, rather than being the bread and butter winner of working AGR in the military. Turns out I don't make a very good stay-at-home mom. I am a bona fide workaholic. So I tried my best, and I love my kids, but I love to work and be productive member in the workforce as well. So I tried to find balance for many years, but that's kind of how we ended up in Nebraska. It was a scary time. There's more people in Omaha than the entire state of North Dakota. So that transition was big for me. I know people don't think Omaha is a big city, but for me, it really was. And yeah, moving from rural North Dakota to big city Omaha was a bit of a culture change for me.
Wow. Yeah, I bet it was. I know for me, moving from Omaha to Beatrice was a big culture change too, just because it was the exact opposite. So
The opposite, yeah.
yeah. And then yeah, you mentioned your kids. I saw that Facebook post that they posted or you posted or shared their photos of 14th grade and or now they're still keeping on that tradition. Thought that was
Right, right. I have kids. My oldest is 21, and then I have one soon to be 20, and I have a 15-year-old and a 7-year-old. So I have, at one time, I had one in college, one in high school, one in junior high, and one in preschool, just to cover all my bases. Um, the youngest one is just to keep us in line, keep us young, but they're super fun. They're all in different stages of their life. Um, and it's just really, really fun, watching them walk through these stages. Yeah, I love being a mom.
so how did you end up or how did you end up getting to BFSB, with our team before the deployment? Because that's where we met back in 2009.
Right. So 2009, I got a letter in the mail. I was the tag secretary as an M-Day soldier. And then I was also working ADOS as a recruiter in Fremont. My youngest was, I believe, 1 year old. So I just had my third kid. And I got this letter in the mail as I was working, for the tag. And I thought, I thought it was, hey, this is, we're offering you a promotion. Because I had been an E6 for a really long time. So I was kind of looking for that next upward mobility. I think it was about 9 years spent at that rank. And moving from state to state was a little bit difficult. People don't know who you are, and having to develop those relationships. But I got this letter. I opened it with high hopes that this was promotion or something. And it was a command direct letter saying you will report to this new unit and get this new MOS effective such and such a day. And I was really caught off guard because I had never really seen a command direct before. And then they were making me get my 5th MOS. And I was like, you want me to go to a 6 month, because it was a golf position, a 35 golf. You want me to do a 6 month MOS queue and then go on a year-long deployment? that's kind of a lot. So through talking and leadership and them with the understanding, yeah, that is a long MOSQ before a year-long deployment. I was able to finagle my way into a 35 Fox slot, which was a 2-month MOSQ in Utah. And so I was the whole thing and how it happened, I was a little bit disgruntled. You know, I had kind of probably a poor attitude about it. There was other people that probably would have made more sense being in that position. But I decided to change my mindset and say, you know what, I can be disgruntled and make this opportunity not one that I enjoy, or I can make a physical effort to have the absolute best time. And that's what I did. I went to MOSQ for 2 months, met the greatest people, had the most fun on the weekends, and we went on all these adventures and hiking and kayaking and took full advantage of Salt Lake City, Utah. And then I moved right into that deployment and said, where in the world can you have these kind of experiences as, living back in Nebraska? So I took full advantage of that. And of course, there's bad days with that, but had the most amazing experience. Got to work with great people, ones that I still keep in touch with to this day. And yeah, I really am thankful and grateful that it happened. Even though at the beginning I was probably not so much.
I that you had one of the, one of the more cohesive teams. All the teams were good, but just your leadership really bringing your two soldiers together who were had different personalities. Um, and then just the relationship between all the E6s, like we were. It was. I look back on that team, and that was one of the strongest teams I've been a part of. So, um, so what motivated you to get into resiliency? Because I remember from talking to you from that first drill weekend, you had a very that was a passion, maybe not necessarily resiliency, but that whole theme. Uh, but what motivated you to get into that?
So it wasn't necessarily resilience from the get-go. I didn't know what that term really meant or what that job really entailed. For me, I was studying biology in college. I love the human body, the genetic makeup, understanding what all that is. So I loved studying it. Um, what was happening on the other side, on my personal side, is that first deployment, we had lost 3 people in Iraq. It was not a great time to be over there, as you know. 03, the war had just started. We were at Mob Station when Bush came on the television and said we're going to war. So it was a very hard and challenging time. But since we've been home in that unit, we lost 3 more to suicide. And it was happening um, at such a quick rate. It was like a train that you were trying to stop, but you couldn't. You saw the train wreck up ahead and you were trying to stop this train and you just couldn't. And I had this like epiphany. I said, maybe it's not biology that I want to study. Maybe it's psychology. And maybe it's, if I could just help people understand that they're going through a tough time, but we can work through those tough times and get out on the other side. Maybe I could do something in that realm of suicide prevention. So that's where my passion lied. I switched everything at school. I was going to UNO. I switched everything from biology to psychology and graduated with an undergraduate degree in psych. Realized close after that there's nothing in this world you can do with an undergraduate degree in psych. So I had to continue on and got a master's in clinical social work. But it was through that personal traumatic events that made it just changed my life choices. It catalyzed me to the clinical social work and the therapy realm. And in the meantime, these opportunities kept opening up in the military. So it was an ADOS position called the State Resiliency Coordinator. And I had talked to a few people. They said you'd be a good fit. I applied for it and it worked out. And then that position, when the R3SP, or the Resiliency and Risk Reduction Suicide Prevention Manager, opened up, they said, we think you'd be a good fit for it. Apply for it. I did, got that job. And I did that job with everything inside of me for almost, I think, about 7 years. There was so much passion in helping soldiers and their families understand suicide, understand resiliency, and how we could prevent suicide. That, yeah, it just overwhelmed me. It was everything for those years. And then I realized, towards the end, that I had to figure out my life balance. Something was a little bit off. I couldn't do other things. My family was starting to get a little bit neglected because the job was coming first, which was fine at the time. But I just had to shift some things, and I did. And that led me to where I'm at right now. But the passion comes from all sorts of angles, and my stars aligned, and God answered my prayers, and put me in a job that I could help others, or I feel like I helped others. Maybe, maybe it was just one or two, but I felt like I was making a difference.
What does resiliency mean, or what is it?
That's a big question, because I think it's a term. We've used the term resiliency to teach a program in the military that maybe got misunderstood, or maybe got lost in translation. So if you look at what resiliency is, textbook answer is the ability to bounce back from adversity. So if you look up resiliency in Google, you'll see a picture of a tennis ball with the idea that you can bounce back from something. Resiliency for me meant a lot of different things. It taught me how to be a better communicator. It taught me how to be a better mom. So I said at the beginning of the podcast, I love being a mom. By far my favorite job. And if you're going to teach me something that says I can do that better, I'm going to eat that up, because I love it so much that I will always want to be better at it. Resiliency taught me how to have an argument with my husband that was, productive instead of counterproductive. It just taught me a lot of life skills that I probably always had learned in smaller scale, but it put it out in front of me in like layman's terms, or chewable, understandable verbiage, so that I could do something with it, so I could make changes to my own life. And that's what I think resiliency is. It's a lot of different things. If you look up skills on how to be more resilient, it depends on who the author is of the book that they're writing, or it depends on what Google sheet you're on, because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Ultimately, just the ability to bounce back from adversity, I think, is the main key term.
No, I know, like you said, with me, I mean, obviously I knew the word resiliency, but when first time it came across, did I remember I was teaching at warrior leader course, now basic leader course. And that was one of the subcomponents of, the attributes of the military leader. And, I really only focused on, well, we need to be able to bounce back. And then, over the years, it expanded to MRT, and now it's ready and resilient. And there's just, all the different things that you can be resilient in: your physical health, your emotional health, social health, spiritual, family. Yeah, I mean, it is such a big thing. So when we're talking about leadership, um, when I do in CODP, I always talk about the definition first: influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation while operating to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. How does resiliency fit into leadership, in your opinion?
Well, going back to some of the growth and really resiliency over time in the military, I think there was some misunderstanding of what resiliency was and how it was projected onto others. So some of the feedback that I had gotten working the program and in talking to units and talking to leaders was, I'm not going I'm not going to be happy all the time. Like, your program tells me I have to be happy all the time. And I was like, that's a gross misunderstanding. Resiliency doesn't mean you're not going to have bad days. It just means, like, hopefully you don't stay bad. Hopefully the hope is that the days that are bad are fewer than the days that are good. You have more good days, or that they don't stay bad for long. I also think that there was terms that were overused that said, it's all or nothing. Like, I'm not a resilient person, or you know, I don't know how to use those skills, or I don't know how to become more resilient, or whatever. It's not an all or nothing. There's skills in the umbrella of resiliency that I'm really good at, and there's skills that I have to work on. And I think the self-awareness is the key component to that. Knowing what you're good at and what you need to work on is the biggest key. Self-awareness, and then having the understanding that I do need to work on these. I knew I need to get better on these because it affects me, but it also affects everybody around me. So the self-awareness key, and then just wanting to improve yourself. So resiliency in the military, I improved communication, relationship building, why I was getting angry the way I was, what were triggers that would make me angry, and then how could I manipulate the situation so that maybe I wasn't reactive, or maybe I could do a pause before I would jump to getting angry or frustrated. All of that was through personal development and self-awareness of why I was doing and feeling the way I was. After I learned that, you can't unlearn it. Like, now why you're doing what you're doing, or why you're thinking what you're thinking, and you can't pretend like you don't know why that exists. I mean, I suppose you could, but that wouldn't be very productive. So making those changes, I know personally that you could cut off my left arm, I wouldn't cry. I don't cry with pain. I cry with frustration. And I, for a long time, didn't understand that. I didn't understand, why there would be tears. But I think just sometimes I don't have words to describe how I feel when I'm frustrated. And that is my emotional reaction to that. Through self-development, through just a deep dive into myself, that's where I learned that. And now I can go into situations with that understanding, and use it to my benefit instead of it being a bad thing. So in resiliency and leadership, I think the communication and relationship building is huge, not only in the military, but just how you handle everyday life. We all communicate with people all day long, whether that be at the grocery store, or at your church, or at home with your family. Nonverbal, verbal, all of the communication is happening all day long. So the better you understand it, the better you can use it for your benefit, instead of it being something that you shy away from, or it's used against you. So self-awareness, that would be key component to resiliency, and something that I think we can all use a little more work on.
Definitely. When you mentioned the grocery store and nonverbal communication, I remembered a vacation that my wife and I were on, and we were in France, and we went to the grocery store to purchase some food so we didn't have to, go to a restaurant, just kind of save some money. and we went to buy some fruit, and what we didn't know was that you had there at that grocery store, and there's some stores in the US that you have to do that with here, that you weigh it, it prints out a tag, and you take it up to the register. We were just thinking like, all right, we'll take it and we'll set it down. And of course, the lady's like, "Where's the sticker?" But she was saying it in French, and we don't know French, and it took a lot of it took that nonverbal communication to really figure out what we were doing. And obviously, we were a little frustrated because we didn't know what was going on. The emotions of a little bit of embarrassment, but it was kind of I don't know, that just popped into my head. Um, talking about the emotions in life, um, there's a quote that I had pulled out of this book. Um, it says, "The daily challenge of dealing effectively with emotions is critical to the human condition because our brains are hardwired to give emotions the upper hand." Um, and you'd mentioned we're always going to, it's normal to have emotions and we have to be self aware. What are some ways that we can increase our self awareness?
Sure. Time. Take some time and practice it. Um, when I did for a while, did some equine therapy and worked with couples and horses. And a lot of times they're quick to anger, right? These couples aren't coming in great places in their marriages or in their relationships, and they're quick to anger. And I learned through that and my studies and my own life that anger is probably the easiest emotion to feel. It's our go-to, it's hardwired. There's probably a reason for that, going way back to like caveman days. But our brains are quick to go to anger. And so when I say time, it's the dramatic pause between an event and what's going to happen next. You just make that time a little bit longer. So instead of like there's a something that happens and you're quick to say something, um, extend that 5 minutes. So instead of saying something, step back for 5 minutes and process why you're angry in the first place, and see if those words are still there after 5-10 minutes. Because I think that they'll probably change, because that anger will die down. You're like, I'm not really angry, I'm frustrated, or I'm not really angry, I'm annoyed. But my anger words then change in that 5 minutes or that 10 minutes. And that's the time that I talk about. Take that pause, process what is going on, and then go from there. Maybe the conversation looks different, the fight looks different, you know, I use traffic jams as an example because I'm from a farm in North Dakota. I don't do well in traffic, and I get super annoyed and frustrated when I'm running late, because that's usually what I am doing.
I think I lost the audio.
Do you lose me?
Yeah. So it went mute at, you get frustrated in traffic, and you're usually running late, and then it just,
So yeah, my go-to, go-to is shouting or yelling or other things in that situation. But if you just pause and you're like, okay, so why am I so mad at traffic right now? And doing a little deep dive, I'm not mad at the traffic. Well, I'm frustrated with the traffic, but I'm mad because I didn't plan my day in a way that allowed me to leave a little bit early so that I could get to my location a little bit early. And so I'm frustrated with myself, but I'm taking it out on the other drivers or the grain truck that I'm following or the road construction that I run into, when really I could have just taken 10 minutes and left a little bit early, knowing that it is road construction season. Um, that is what I'm talking about, self-development. Just analyzing, maybe at the end of the day, hey, I went through these 3 things that were completely threw my day off, and why did they? What did I do right in that situation? What did I do wrong? What could I do better next time? That's the analytical part that can prevent the bad from happening. Will it prevent all bad from happening? Absolutely not. I don't live in you know, a la land that, again, I'm going to have all good days and no bad things will ever happen. And I'll never be late. I'll never hit track. That life and that world doesn't exist. But how do I handle it? That I can control. And through this, I learned a lot of how to let go of things that I can't control. If you are more of a controlling person, like you like things a certain way and you like to do things a certain way, it is that something that you can control, or is it something that's out of your hands and do you just need to let that go? That's been a process that I've had to learn. How other people have looked at me and viewed me. That was something that I had to learn. That's something I worked on really, really hard for a lot of years. I cared a great, great deal of how other people viewed me, and if people liked me. I spent way too much time caring and losing sleep over if somebody didn't like me. And it's something that I had to work on a long time. Like I can't control if you like me. I need to let that go. You know, if you don't, and I didn't give you a reason not to, then I have to let that go. Your view of me is not my problem. Um, so
Help you get there over the
so
years.
yeah, I mean, turning 30 helped with that, you know, just age and knowledge and wisdom as you grow older, helped with that. But that is something I did. I lost a lot of sleep. You know, so and so doesn't seem to like me. And my husband, who is a great sounding board for a lot of things, would ask me, is like, why do you care? Why do you care? And I'm like, I don't know, but I care a great deal. Um, and maybe it was through his, you know, constant, you shouldn't give so much weight to that person's opinion. Or maybe it was reprogramming my brain from just growing up in a family that cared a lot about what others felt or how others viewed because of the small community that they grew up in, and the family that they grew up in. Just having a better understanding of why that was that way helped me get over doing that in my adulthood, and then projecting that on my kids is just one example. It was a process and it took years. So time, it takes time.
So with with building that time in, you said that at the end of the day you thought about the different events throughout the day and you thought how you could do it better. And then that did that allow you to, the next time that happened, to separate yourself and kind of give, create that time?
And sometimes I'm better at it and sometimes I'm not. You know, it's a process. We learned that through when emails became a thing. Again, aging myself. But
There too.
right, sending an email without letting it sit in your inbox for a while, just firing back right away. And those are words you can't take back. So learn through process. Hey, maybe when I'm fired up, I let that email sit for a little while before I hit send. I reread it a few times. I let somebody else read it. You know, what is it I'm trying to say? And is that being said through my words or is it being said through an emotion? And what does that look like? So yeah, I think that was the biggest and one that we still can take examples from is sending that email. Do you send it or do you let it sit there for a little bit?
I I used to be really good at sending emails real quick and really long. And yeah, exactly how you said, take time, let somebody else read it. Um, and yeah, that's it's important. That's one of the or one of the good examples of taking time and just sitting on it for a day or having somebody else read it. What are some other components of resilience?
Like I said, it depends on what book you're reading or what Google search you're in. Um, the ones that I took the most away from were communication skills. because like I said, it is 100% of your day. From the time you wake up till the time you go to the bed, you are communicating with somebody somewhere, somehow. And how can you do better at that? We can all improve, even if we think we're a good communicator. We can all improve. You can ask for feedback on how you can get better. How am I doing as a leader in the military? You ask your squad, your team, your platoon, your company. And in your relationships, you talk to your spouse or your significant other, or even your kids, like let them in on the conversation, because it shows them too that communication, number one, is important, but number two, personal growth is equally as important. So that was huge for me. Relationship building, there was a skill that I learned a long time ago, where I had to sit and analyze how much information I was receiving from my kids and how focused I was on receiving that information. So for example, and I use this in my trainings too, is at the time I had a kindergartner, and if you listen to a kindergartner's stories, sometimes like it's painful. It's painful because they're long and, you know, all over the place and unfocused, and chances are they're like about boogers or something. And I'll be doing something at work, on my laptop, making supper, and I'm just like, not now, not now. I don't have time now. And the words that most resonated with me was, if you're not present for their good news, who do you think that they're going to take their bad news to? And I sat and thought about that. I chewed on that for a while. And I really analyzed, how often do I sit and listen to the good news and provide them a space that feels comfortable enough that they can bring me the bad news? Because that was heartbreaking to me when I was analyzing. I was like, I don't have a lot of time. I'm not giving them a lot of time or my time. I'm showing them that their good news isn't super important. And of course, case in point, like there's times, you know, I'm busy with something. Okay, we have to table this right now, but I want to revisit it later. And understanding that you can't always drop everything to listen to a booger story about kindergarten. When those exist, sorry, somebody called it in. Knowing when those exist and taking notice of those conversations are important. For me, understanding the emotion behind the frustration, why I felt frustrated on certain things, and why I didn't, that self evolution for me were very important. So emotional intelligence and self-regulation. And then I think another one that is, as I am working in the industry that I am now, working with victims and still doing some mental health therapy stuff, is the flexibility of thought. There is people that get so caught up in, well, I thought this should have happened this way, and it didn't, and it just destroys them. And it can be small things too. Like, I thought this vacation was going to bring, you know, the family was going to have the best time, and maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But that flexibility in their thinking, where okay, so this didn't happen, and that's okay. Now we're on to something else, or how can we move on to something else, is a huge and important skill that there's a lot of people that need to get better at, because they're very rigid in their thinking. And sometimes they need professional help. Sometimes you need to go talk to a therapist or go to some kind of doctor to work past those rigid thinking skills that you have, to become more flexible in your thinking. But I think that's a very important skill.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I definitely want to come back to that seeking help in a little bit. Um, but with resiliency, how does resiliency fit into teams and team building?
So I love team building. It's obviously easier to build teams on a smaller scale than a much larger scale, but I love the idea of being part of something bigger than you. That's what was one of the main reasons I love the military so much, is just being part of something, being part of a team. And healthy teams are the best. When you, like I said earlier, we went through something together in our deployment and we all still stay in touch. So sometimes that helps too, is when a team can go through some adversity or something challenging and it grows that team together. That's kind of a cool experience as well. It's not one that we can force. You don't force adversity on a team, but there's a saying in the military, embrace the suck, right? And it's one that kind of everybody understands. When you're going through something hard and you're with other people, you come out of it on the other end with a quote unquote war story about it. You remember how horrible that was? Oh my gosh, that was so horrible. And it seems like those stick, and actually improve that team cohesiveness. But it can't be forced. So what I've seen amongst the organization in growing teams with resiliency, it's solely dependent on the unit that I'm in. But one example I'll give, I was out with a CAV unit and they're a pretty cohesive group anyway. But this one, they had just went through something as a whole that was super hard, and how they handled it was just amazing, because it was different than any other unit I had ever been a part of. So after they allowed some time for the members of the unit just to tell stories or talk or look at photos or cry, or they gave them the opportunity to do all of that. They gave them the space and the safety to do all of that. And after everybody kind of said, okay, we're over this phase, what do we do next, they sent them out to work. And it wasn't work, it was, hey, we're going to go do a 10-mile ruck, or we're going to go play dodgeball and just kill each other on the gym floor. And I just thought that was super impactful, because that's what they needed at that time. So building resiliency in teams as a leader is understanding, what does your team need at this moment in time? And then taking advantage of that situation and using it for growth. Another key component to building a resilient team is vulnerability, and being vulnerable as a leader or as a team member. Again, understanding that there's a time and a place for stories. I wouldn't sit down at the table at lunch and everybody's kind of jaw jacking and having a good time, and I'm like, hey, I had this traumatic event happen. There's a time and a place, but if it fits, I think being vulnerable as a leader is so impactful. I've sat down when I was first sergeant. I sat down with a person in the unit that was struggling because his wife was struggling with postpartum depression. And I was able to be vulnerable and talk about my own experience with postpartum depression and just show this individual that, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and here's some key components to helping her get through this challenging time. And I had to be vulnerable. Like, I had to talk about experiences that I had. But I think that was so much more impactful than just saying, oh, we'll make sure to get her help, you know. So that is a component to building teams. And then communication. I see a theme for our resiliency talk today. Communication and trust that if you're going to communicate, that you will, and that you say what you're going to you do what you say you're going to do. Um, Prioritizing people on your team builds resilient teams. I know that's hard. I was AGR, I was a technician, I was MDay. There's not really a job that I didn't hold. MDay is tough. It is tough to be all the things for all the people 2 days a month. Like, that's tough. And sometimes our families do or maybe don't understand the time commitment on the other 28 days a month. But finding balance and providing that time for other team members or other soldiers is huge. You want to build a solid team, you have to have time in those other 28 days. You have to follow up with them. You talk and have a really great conversation at drill. And then 2 weeks goes by and you're really thinking about this person. You have to follow up with them, shooting a text or an email or something saying, hey, where are you at with this? We had a good conversation. Where are you at now? Builds that cohesiveness. There is something, though, a disclaimer I want to talk about with building a solid team is you have to give them the ability to spread their wings and fly. I think I've seen that in a few places across my career, across that 25 years, that we build a solid team and we say it's never going to be like this anywhere else. And people don't feel confident or comfortable applying for a promotion or applying to go to a different unit or any kind of movement in their career because they feel like they'll never have that cohesiveness in a team somewhere else. So I think it's probably something we don't talk about a lot in team building is breaking up a team. But there's an element to that where you have to be like, hey, we're a tight-knit team or we're a tight-knit group and it's great. And you might not have this going somewhere else right away, but maybe you're that key component that can build that somewhere else too. So you never want to make somebody feel like, they have to stay in E5 because their team's dependent on them and it can't be like that somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes total sense. I mean, one of the things that I kind of flagged, I was going to mention at some point in time, but I think it fits here, is there's this leadership book I read a couple years ago, and one of the points was failure is always an option. So, and what they meant by that was, more like in the training environment is, people make mistakes, and as a leader, you have to, guide them through that. We never get it right the first time, and as you allow your subordinates to grow, like you said, let them spread their wings, let them, try different things, and guide them and coach them and mentor them as they make those mistakes, so they can learn from it. And then, to the broader point that you were making, I always look back at our team that we had in Iraq, and everybody went their separate directions throughout their career, and everybody excelled. Yates is the CSM out in the battalion out in Kearney. Bose, now Shimmick, is, well, she was a first sergeant, now she just rotated out. Smith was, you were, and everybody, moved on and excelled in their careers. And Hutt, even though he got out, he got you a job. So I mean, he's doing really well as well. So.
Yeah. I mean, you did a great job in leadership development. MI is an interesting little group of people because you have a lot of different personalities, and the dynamic was interesting at times. And then after the BFSB migrated into the MEB, we lost, our intel section and people had to go to different places. But it was there that I really fully understood the importance of like the self-development on the military side, and not pigeonholing yourself into one particular job or one particular skill. It's growing a lot of things to make yourself marketable in a lot of different places, because you don't know if that job is going to be there. You don't know if that unit is going to be there, the way our times are changing. And being open to that, I think there's a lot of that rigid thinking, like I was this MOS and this is the only thing I can do, and I have to do this because this is what I enjoyed. Well, you don't know if you never try something else, you don't know if you won't enjoy it. So becoming a little more flexible and trying new things, doing things that scare the crap out of you, and then going into those with a positive attitude in hopes that it's all going to work out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But just always hoping for the best, I think will be a good start. But the career progression and the unit movement, I saw that a little bit in the 623rd. You know, they didn't want to bounce around from section to section or platoon to platoon because they had such this I don't know, die hard, I belong to second platoon and this is where I exist and this is my home, and we don't like first platoon, you know, they do this and they do this. I felt that back in the engineers in North Dakota, first bridge against second bridge. It was always first bridge against second. We're the best. No, we're the best. We do this better. And if there was an E6 promotion, there would be E5s that would turn it down because they didn't want to go to that other bridge. And I was like, man, I I would like to create an atmosphere where if we're so great, then maybe I will go over to the other bridge and make them even better, you know, instead of pigeonholing myself into a spot because I think that's the best that we or that I can do. Um, I think that mentality can be great for the moment, but long term, not so much.
And that is the challenge for senior leaders. Like in the very beginning, you were talking about team building and building cohesive teams is easy with a small team, and it's easy to, like you were saying, you know, first platoon against second platoon. But then as you move up, now you have to think about, all right, now how do we tie this? Now we're a company, we're the best company, or we're the best battalion, etc. So yeah, that is the challenge. One of the things that you had mentioned was talking about strengths in others, and
Hmm.
you know, you were talking about how our team in Iraq was very diverse and we worked together well. And then, you know, recently I took I think it was the DISC profile, and it was really interesting to learn about myself, how I view things. And then we also talked about how other people, you know, the strengths in other people were somebody I might view as maybe lazy or maybe not motivated, but really pulling out what their strengths are, whereas they're really good with people or you know, build relationship management. So how do you, as a leader and tying this to resilience, how do you identify strengths in self and others? You know, what are some best practices?
So I did Strengths Finder a few times, and I was a presenter at the lead conference where we would talk about strengths. There is some strengths uh, modules built into the resiliency training from way back, and I love Strengths Finder because it doesn't talk one time about weaknesses. It doesn't say here's the opposite side to your strengths. It's just here's what you're good at. How do you hone in on that? And then how do you build a team with people that are good at other things? Um, and I think really good leaders are okay with saying, I'm not good at A, B, and C, but you are. So I'm going to use you in these roles using communication so that they understand why they're being used in those roles, because I'm not good at that. And that's not everyday stuff. Like I'm not good at, you know, taking out my garbage, but I see that you're good at taking out. That's not what I'm talking about. There's people that are really good at public speaking, and then there's people that is their worst nightmare. For me, it's spiders. I love public speaking, but if you told me I had to go on a mission and collect all the tarantulas, I'm like, no, there's somebody else that's good at that, and I'm going to find that person. So that is part of that vulnerability, is saying, I need work on this. I'm going to read self-help books. I'm going to listen to podcasts. I'm going to really work on this skill. I'm going to ask for feedback from others on how I'm doing with my process. I think that's a great attribute, and one that we could all use in again, military life and everyday life. But I love StrengthsFinder, because I learned, here's the 5 that I'm most good at, and here's why I'm most good at it. And here's how I can use that for my benefit. But being vulnerable is part of that, saying, here's what I need to work on.
Yeah, that is hard for people in general, is to be vulnerable with others. And, just saying that, I'm not good at this or that. And, I know, it's too easy for, in the military, people will fall back to that, I think they call it the pace setter style leadership, do it my way, we're gonna excel, no failure. This is the standard, follow me. And I'm not, no dig at the infantry, because that's their motto, but um well, as you move up, really finding people's strengths and using those strengths for the greater purpose of the team, and accomplishing whatever goal or mission that team has set aside.
Yeah. I mean, that I can't remember exactly what it was called, but I took the StrengthsFinder my very first time when my 15-year-old was, I believe, probably 3 or 4 years old, and he was falling asleep, laying with his head on a pillow on the couch, like on my lap, and my laptop was off to the side. So I'm working, I'm multitasking. I'm like rubbing his back with one hand, and doing StrengthsFinder with the other. And my number one strength, and again, I can't remember what it was called, but it was like something to do with love, like loving others, or something along those lines. But it made perfect sense to me, because here I am in a situation that subconsciously I am in my happy place. I am, with my kid, and he is finding 100% comfort on my lap on the couch, and it made total sense that would be my number one strengths at that time. And I said, well, what if I took this at work, 2 years, 3 years later, and I'm having a not great work day? Would that still be my number one strength? And it may not be number one, but it would most likely be in my top 5 or 6. So your strengths kind of flip flop what you're good at, as depending on the situation that you're in. But they're always going to be intermingled with each other in the top, handful. And how can I use that to my benefit? So when I was working as a first sergeant, you don't think of a first sergeant as a love person, right? It's not like a role that, oh, I'm going to go to that person because their number one strength is loving others. But actually, I use that and my communication skills to really understand and have a deep connection with the soldiers that I was serving, and helping them achieve goals that they wanted to achieve, or taking a real interest in what they were going through. So soldiers are going through stuff all the time, you know, divorces and marriages and childbirth and twins and all of these things, where other first sergeants who maybe had strengths in other things, um, which is fine, to each our own, or to each their own. But I use that, my strengths, to build those relationships with my soldiers. So taking a real and valid interest in situations that they were going through. And if it was a hard time, then working with them to get through that hard time. So I guess it helped too that I was a mental health therapist, you know, but there's a reason I took that role. You know, there's a reason I followed that career path. And it was, again, going back to those strengths. That's the strength that I have, is I love people. I love others, and I want to serve them in any way I can. Um, so having that understanding has greatly benefited me, you know, rather than taking a career path that I didn't feel fulfilled in. I found something that I was good at and honed in on it.
Yeah. So you mentioned, soldiers and going through just life, the ups and downs, and and we can teach resiliency, we can implement it, but there's still going to be those down days, and sometimes you just get caught in time in your life that it's just you don't see hope, or you're depressed. And you'd also mentioned about seeking help. Um, the military, this year they required certain training, and I'm assuming it's the military, at least the Army, talking about prevention, intervention, and postvention with suicide prevention. But what are some ways, or what are some best practices or ways that we can help with prevention, suicide prevention, and or encouraging others to get help?
Right. Um, so stemming back from 1997, I've seen progression in the military. And I can only really speak smart about the Army because that's the only branch that I served in. But they've done a good job, right? They've worked hard at figuring out what we need, when we need it, and trying to facilitate resources for that. So back in the day, aging ourselves again, they didn't have mental health therapists attached to units. They didn't have um, any kind of mental health for that matter. They didn't have family programs that dealt with families. That was all post 9/11 stuff. They maybe had a little here and there sprinkled with like maybe the chaplain corps, but it was few and far between. Post 9/11 is where they really took an understanding to, we go through some stuff. M-Day soldiers in the National Guard are asked to do a lot more than the 1 weekend a month, the 2 weeks a year. And what does that look like? And how do we facilitate that need? So it has gotten better. Um, there's always room for improvement from leadership at the highest levels on down. There's always room for improvement. And like you said, there's sayings that kind of stick with you. Um, the one that for me is we've always done it this way. That's the worst thing a leader can say, or a thought process they can have. Well, this is just how we've always done it. Um, the progression is there. The trainings are there. I know they shift, they change depending on the times. There's emphasis on it, but I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that we've done a really good job as a whole, putting emphasis on the importance of mental health and resiliency in our service members and their families for that matter. And how
Thank
can we
you.
improve? How can we improve? There's a lot of different things that we can do, smaller things that will really add up and make change. If you have an open door policy, then have an open door policy. Don't say that you have an open door policy and then not have an open door policy. If you say that I encourage you to ask for help if you need it, but I'm going to, not so much punish you, but give you not the same opportunities as others if you do ask for that help, that's not productive. You know, you can't encourage asking for help and then not allow that person upward mobility or, you know, promotion or whatever the case may be. That's a punishment for asking for help. There is different MOSs that really hinder asking for assistance, and I understand that, and I understand the reason for that. Um, so I would say if you don't feel comfortable talking to somebody within the organization, then talk to somebody in a space that doesn't speak to our organization if you fall in that MOS umbrella. And if you know what I'm talking about, then you're one of those. So we have things in place like vet centers that don't talk to the VA and don't talk to the military. You can still get services without repercussions for your MOS. So I encourage that if you fall into that category. Knowing your soldiers, having day-to-day conversation with them, knowing who they are as people, where they're at in their life, what struggles that they have. And then knowing that sometimes those struggles come with additional things that could go wrong. For example, if you know a soldier's having relationship issues or possibly going through a divorce, know that if you're in that category, it can take a turn for the worse real fast. So staying on top of that, checking in with them, making sure that they're doing okay and that they have the resources available that they need, is a key component. If you don't know your soldiers, you just rely on that 2 days a month to get all. We're working, you know, these soldiers are working. They're out on job sites, they're out in the field, they're out doing stuff. They're not going to take that opportunity or that time to really sit down and say, you know what, my marriage is failing and I don't know what to do about it. So it's one of those that you go back to taking time out of those other 28 days to really know where your soldiers are at. And that goes down to like kids and school, and everything can be hard. Life is hard. You know, did they lose a parent? I'm in this sandwich generation right now where I'm still taking care of kids and I'm now taking care of parents on some level as well. So I'm sandwiched in between this. Everybody needs me all the time. And I just feel like I'm drowning, you know, getting to know your soldiers and understanding where they're at. And then knowing what resources are in your community or in their community. So if you live in, if you live in Omaha or Lincoln, I know in Nebraska, that's always kind of some heartburn. Everything always involves, or all the resources are in the metro. There's some truth to that. There's a lot of resources in Lincoln and Omaha. But if your soldiers live in North Platte, then doesn't really make any sense. So what's in their area? What can you leverage close to them and ask for help? There's people in places in our organization that's what they do. That is, I mean, there's still an R3SP. That's what she does. She reaches out to communities and finds resources for individuals that need it. So asking for help, being vulnerable and saying, I can't fix this on my own. I need some assistance, and knowing where to ask. And if you don't get the answer, then ask again or ask somebody else until you get the answer that you're looking for. It's all basic soldier skills, taking care of your soldiers. But I think sometimes the mission becomes so big, we forget the basic soldier skills. We have to take care of one another because we're what we have. On deployment, it feels like that's easier because there's no outside noise. There's no outside, you know, anything, and all of what we have is right there. And that feels easier. You know, you can see the change in somebody day in and day out, where you might not be able to see that when you see them one time a month. So if they're on social media, I did a lot of my business as the R3SP on social media. people would send me a post and say, hey, this doesn't sound like them, or this sounds scary, or it sounds like they're going through a really hard time by what they just posted on social media. I'm like, you're right. That doesn't sound like them. Let's reach out. So that pulse and that heartbeat comes from many different things. You just have to be on top of it. It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. But that's your biggest bang for your buck. That's your money right there. Taking care of soldiers.
You just answered all the questions I was going to ask, so I appreciate that. Made it a lot easier. But you're going back to what the military has done. I agree with you. We have done so much. We have improved so much as far as providing different services, resources, and really, developing these programs. And I think where I was going to go with it after that you went there on your own was, but we're also our biggest enemy, preventing that from being successful and having a stigma within, certain groups and, circles where, some people feel hesitant to seek that help. So, overcoming that stigma and allowing people to know that it's okay to get help. Like, there are times where you need to reach out. I don't, going to a counselor. I've been to a counselor many times. My wife and I, are going through counseling now. It's a year and a half or over almost 2 years after I got back from deployment. And still, it's, life is challenging sometimes, and reaching out. And then the last part was just being aware and being that good leader. Being a leader is being a servant. You're serving your people and obviously the organization as well, but focusing back on serving your people is knowing them and, being aware of what's going on in their life and um, what they might need, different triggers like you mentioned. So I really appreciate you bringing all that up. So, well, I think we've gone through all the notes I had. I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on about resilience or suicide prevention?
Well, honestly, I could talk about the topic all day, and we have to probably find a good stopping point. I find the importance of resiliency worth sharing to the masses. And I know I got a lot of teasing holding that job and going out to units, and they're like, oh, let's, act like everything's normal because the suicide guy is here. And I kind of joked around with that role. I'm like, yeah, that's me. But a lot of the people that were bothered by things that I had to say were bothered because there was something going on in their life as well. So there's just a level of awareness that we need to have. And if your gut tells you something's off, man, I have trusted my gut when everybody else or everything around else is failing around me. So when you're dabbling in these areas, when you're learning about soldiers, when you're, taking a valid effort in becoming more resilient, I would just say trust your training, but trust your gut. If something feels off, talk to somebody about it. The worst that can happen is you're wrong. And I think more often than not, you're going to be right. So, yeah, my leaving notes is care about others and always work on self-improving, self-awareness, and trust your gut.
All right. Well, thanks, Kelly. It was great seeing you again. And hope we need to schedule a reunion, get the whole team back together again. I know, I think 2 years from now will be 15 years. Maybe that'll be something we could shoot for, if not sooner.
I'll host it at our house. We're centrally located. Count me in.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.